GameMasters here, and I want to take a bite at vampires in Dungeons & Dragons, and really in role-playing games in general, as vampires share many characteristics across different games. In Dungeons & Dragons, vampires are depicted as undead creatures that feed on the life force of the living, usually in the form of blood, sometimes in the form of energy, sometimes in the form of really something else entirely. They can have various supernatural powers and abilities that are often portrayed as charismatic, seductive, and manipulative, using their powers of suggestion to control others. They are immortal, but can be destroyed by a specific means, such as a stake through the heart or exposure to sunlight. They are also vulnerable to holy symbols and spells, as well as silver weapons. Vampires are really a staple and core of the horror genre, and their inclusion in your game can add a dark and eerie element. They are a challenging and exciting opponent for players to face, requiring strategy and cunning to defeat. As mentioned earlier, vampires are undead creatures, and are generally immune to aging and most forms of death. This makes them nearly impossible to kill, and they can continue to exist for centuries, even millennia. Vampires possess a range of supernatural abilities, including enhanced strength, agility, and extreme sense of sight and hearing. They are also able to use their powers of suggestion to influence and control others, making them excellent at manipulating and deceiving those around them. Now, despite their many powers, they also have a number of weaknesses that can be exploited. For example, they can be vulnerable to sunlight and silver, which we kind of talked about, and that silver can cause them great harm. Most vampires are also vulnerable to holy symbols, and clerics have a strong arsenal of spells that can weaken and even destroy a vampire. Vampires must feed on the blood of the living in order to sustain themselves, and if they go too long without feeding, they may become weakened or frenzied. Because of this, vampires will gather together and form distinct clans, each with its own unique traits and abilities. For example, there may be a clan of vampires who can transform into wolves, or a clan that is particularly good at using magic. But it is within these clans that they have an even more powerful strength, and will often gather humans together as a feeding herd, like cattle, keeping those humans locked away and not killing them, but instead will bleed them dry just enough to weaken them so that they cannot escape, but will continue to produce blood, which the vampires will then continue to feed upon. Strahd von Zarovich is perhaps one of the most famous vampires found within Dungeons & Dragons, taking up residence in a setting called Ravenloft. He is charismatic and quite sadistic. He is cunning and very intelligent. He may not go for your jugular right off the bat, but instead will lure you in with his charm until you are vulnerable. Strahd is a far cry from being a mindless creature of the night. He is a very complex and multifaceted creature with motives and desires that often conflict one another. He is not evil for just sake of being evil. It's his incredible backstory that contributes to his, the book would consider it to be his alignment. It is full of loss and heartbreak. He was once a human nobleman and was once in love with a woman named Tatiana who rejected his advances, and she married Strahd's younger brother. Now, this rejection shattered Strahd's heart, and he became consumed with jealousy and anger. Strahd confronted his brother in a fit of rage and murdered him, and then pursued his wife. She fled in terror and flung herself to her death over the castle walls. Strahd's own guards saw what he had done and shot him full of arrows, but he didn't die. Instead, mists closed in around Strahd and transformed him into a vampire, and when those mists dissipated, he was in the domain of dread Ravenloft. Within this realm, he continues to search for Tatiana's soul, feeling that if he can reincarnate her with her soul, then he will finally be at peace. As a vampire, Strahd became a cruel and ruthless ruler, using his powers to maintain his hold over the land of Barovia. He became known as the Vampire Lord, and his castle Ravenloft became a symbol of his power and the terror he inspired in those who lived under his rule. Vampires can be very complex and tragic figures in your role-playing games. They don't have to simply be mindless creatures intent on baring their fangs and biting necks. They can easily be a symbol of the dangers of obsession, of heartbreak, and the thirst for power. They can taunt the players from the shadows, and who knows, perhaps they could even provide assistance, as really not all vampires have to be evil. What is the most powerful vampire in your game? What special powers have been given to them? Do good vampires exist in your campaign? Can they survive in sunlight, or have any of them developed the capabilities of ignoring any of the other stereotypical vampire lore? Let me know down in the comments. Let's bleed this subject dry, and until next our paths cross, may your fangs not fall out.